These are all creatures of natural law, but not moral law. They don't follow or need moral law, only moral beings. So even in heaven, God has a moral law for the angels. If we look at Ezekiel 28, 15 and 16, it talks about the fall of Lucifer. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. Now, one part of that reading that may be a little confusing to some, it says, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Somebody might interpret that to mean that God destroyed Satan. But I think a better reading of that would be, and I removed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. God removed him from his position. And where did he send him? Down here to this earth, didn't he? And what evidence do we have from what we've read so far that there's moral law in heaven? Satan sinned and iniquity was found in him. And of course, he was cast out of heaven. There's the text that we will come to a little later. Without law, there is no sin. Another question that comes up from time to time is, would you say that the law is sin? And in Romans 7:7, we have the statement, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the law. For I would not have known covetousness unless the law had said, you shall not covet. So what is the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law is to reveal sin. So Monday's lesson, we're going to look a little more into Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is Moses' final instructions to the Hebrews before they took the land, and among those instructions were also the commands to obey. Even the most cursory reading of the book of Deuteronomy shows how crucial obedience to the law was for the nation of Israel. In a real sense, it was the people's covenant obligation. And God had done so much for them and would continue to do so much for them, things that they couldn't do for themselves and that they did not deserve to begin with. Isn't that the interpretation or the description of grace? Doing for us something we can't do for ourselves? Giving us something that we don't deserve? What he asked in response for all the good things that he did for them was obedience to his law. And it's no different now. God's grace saves us apart from the works of the law. Therefore, we conclude that a man is justified by faith apart from the deeds of the law, Romans 3:28. Again, by the deeds of the law, no flesh shall be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Romans 3:20. But as a result of the salvation that we so graciously have been given, God has asked us, if you love me, keep my commandments. From John 14:15. Deuteronomy could be seen as one big object lesson in grace and law. By grace, God redeems us, doing for us what we couldn't do ourselves. From the fall of Adam onward, up to those who live through the time of trouble and the mark of the beast, a people depicted as those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, Revelation 14:12. God's relationship with his covenant people is one of law and grace. God's grace forgives us for having violated his law, and God's grace enables us to obey his law as well. An obedience that arises from our covenant relationship with him. Now, there's a question here that we all need to think about. How can we avoid the trap of legalism as we obey the law? And I wonder if anybody has an answer to that question. How can we avoid legalism? Because we think we need to obey God, we need to keep his commandments, and many think that's how we'll be saved. How can we avoid that attitude? To put it in a few simple words, if we obey God because we love him and we want to do what he wants us to do, that is obedience through love. If we obey God because we think that's how we're going to be saved, that's legalism. And I would hope that none of us would fall into that trap. Now we go into the story of when Moses was given the command. We have the children of Israel. God asked Moses to come up and he gave him the 10 Commandments. And when he came down the hill, he was gone 40 days. And they said, what's happened to Moses? What's happened to this man? We don't know what's happened to him. And they asked Aaron to make them a golden calf. And when Moses came down, God told him to come down. And when Moses came down and saw what was going on, what happened? He had these 2 tablets of stone in his hand. He threw them down and broke them. The people had broken their promise. Even though they didn't have the 10 Commandments at this point, they apparently realized that idol worship was not what they should be doing. And to me, it seems hard for me to believe that Aaron would fall into that trap when they asked him to make them a golden calf. But anyway, he did. So now we find that God has asked Moses to prepare 2 stones just like the ones he broke. And also to make an ark of wood. When I think back, I think of today how we would accomplish those things. We have a lot of fancy tools, don't we? Can't help but wonder, how did he accomplish that out in the wilderness? How did he cut out those stones? How did he make that cabinet? And I'm an industrial arts teacher. Those things come to my mind. Anyway, he did it. And God told him to bring those stones up to him, and he would rewrite the Ten Commandments on them. So God wrote on the tablets, according to the first writing, the Ten Commandments. And then he came back down the mountain and he put those in the ark. A few things took place at this time, shortly after this. Aaron died. Oh, we should mention Aaron, the one thing that Aaron did. Did somebody want something? When Moses asked Aaron how that golden calf came about, what did he say? Just threw some gold in the fire, and out came the calf. He not only didn't know about idol worship, he didn't know how to tell the truth at that point, did he? He just weakened to the request of the congregation. Anyway, Aaron died now, and Eleazar, his son, ministered as priest, and they journeyed on. And at this point, the Lord asked. Let me get my notes straight here. I know it's right here. The Lord separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to stand before the Lord to minister to him and to bless his name. I have a hard time with this part. Maybe somebody has an answer to it. Levi has no portion nor inheritance with his brethren, because the Lord is his inheritance, just as the Lord promised him. I'm not sure just what was involved in that. Do you have something to share?
Just going to say to what you were just saying a minute ago, this morning, Dan was just reading to me about the cross, and when Jesus, when the darkness fell over the cross. And what he was reading said that that the Father was right there. But if he had shown himself, if he even gave one tiny little ray of light, that everyone that was there would have completely died immediately.
Yeah, we know that.
And we
yes.
need to continue to understand our place. We are not gods. Today, in the present time, most human beings think they're gods. They're pretty sure they're the highest power in the universe, which is a very scary thing to think. But we need to remember our place and who our God is.
Okay. What was involved? Can somebody tell me what was involved in the fact that Levi had no portion or inheritance with his brethren? We know they didn't have land. They went to all the different villages and they were given a portion there, but it wasn't theirs. Apparently it was kind of on loan while they were living there. Who can tell me? Because I don't know, I'll be honest with you. The Lord was their inheritance. What does that mean? Anybody have any idea about that? Well, I guess we'll leave it at that because I don't know, and maybe some of you don't know, or maybe you're too shy to tell me. We find that Moses stayed in the mountain 40 days again. And there's an interesting portion here. The Lord chose not to destroy you. What did the Lord say to Moses at that time? He said, "Get out of my way. I'm just going to wipe them out," didn't he? But Moses pled for the congregation. And so God honored his plea, and he didn't destroy them. So at this point, it's time for them to go in and possess the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. There's another text here, and I don't even have the location of it, but and now, Israel, what does the Lord require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command you today for your good. Now, that's an important point there, for your good. Yes, this gentleman has a statement.
Going back to Levites, that question, why did they not given land and inheritance? Did they not receive something more than land? He made this nation or this group of people to take care of the everything uh,
Take
they
care
were
of their
to
spiritual
care-
needs.
They were to carry the ark. They were to take care of all of the necessities that it took to keep things going. They were actually adopted, as I see it, closer to the Lord and the rest of them. So land becomes even less significant. Now, I might say something about living among a lot of Jews. Land is so important to them. Even when they think about investment, they think nothing but land. We don't understand that in our day and age, why land was so precious to them. But this was the promise, and God was fulfilling a promise that he made to Abraham and so forth. And so he was fulfilling the promise, but they became, as I see it, so possessed with this promise that they basically didn't take care of it towards the end, because they basically joined with the rest of the heathens and did all of their worshiping not to the God of heaven, but to God of man. So I think that Levites were blessed far more than those that received a lot of land and so forth.
Okay, today, if I think about this in today's time, if somebody worked, let's say for the denomination, just to make it similar, and they didn't receive any wages, they didn't have any land. In our day and age, how would they support themselves? But this is a different economy, isn't it? The way they were living, they did receive something, and that was a tithe, wasn't it? And so it's hard for us to understand in our economy, but God blessed them in their work, and God was their inheritance. And we're not sure just exactly how that was fulfilled, but they were certainly blessed because of the work that they were doing for God. Well, let's move on to to Wednesday's lesson. I'm not sure what this term for Tuesday's lesson, Leitov Lach, means. I think they'd give a description here. Can't put my finger on it at the moment. Anyway, let's move on to Wednesday's lesson. We have a clock here. Yes, okay. They are constantly reminded that they were slaves in Egypt. And God brought them out with a mighty hand. And when you think about the things that God did for them when they were delivered from Egypt, it's just absolutely amazing to me to think how they could forget what God had done. Crossing over the sea or through the sea. And we know that when they did that, God pushed the water back, they went through. And what happened to the Egyptians when they tried to cross through? The water came back and drowned them all, didn't it? What a miracle that was. We think about when they were out of water. Moses struck the rock and water came out of the rock. We think about when they didn't have food, God provided manna. Now, as I think about that, I suppose if I had nothing but manna every day, I might get tired of it. And apparently they did too, and they desired the meat and the onions and the leeks that they had back in Egypt. And they had to learn some hard lessons there. God did give them food, give them meat, quail. And because of their cravings, many of them died, didn't they? But they had plenty of meat at that point in time. God's mighty deliverance by his grace from the slavery and oppression of Egypt. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of bondage. And even in the New Testament times, this appears with the exodus of Egypt by God's great power, a symbol of salvation by faith in Christ. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians, attempting to do so, were drowned. So salvation by faith, or faith being an important issue here, is something for us to remember. We find now that Moses repeats the basic commandments to keep the rest on the seventh-day Sabbath, but he gives some additional emphasis. Moses is expanding on what already had been given them to keep the Sabbath not only as memorial of creation, but what else? As a memorial of redemption from Egypt. So the Sabbath had a double meaning there. God's grace saved them from Egypt and offered them rest from their work. Now, in response to the grace God gave them, they needed to extend that grace to others. And in this case, the seventh-day Sabbath becomes not just a powerful symbol of creation, but a powerful symbol of redemption and grace. And this is an important point to me. Everyone in the household, not just the children, but the servants, The animals, even the strangers among them, were to be given rest. The Sabbath extends to others the grace given to the Jews, as well even to those outside of the covenant people themselves. And it is found in the heart of God's law what God has graciously done for them, they need to do for others. Do we always remember that? I think of times when we may ask others to do work for us on the Sabbath that we wouldn't do for ourselves. And it's something that always I think of when traveling, especially. Another point here is their salvation, or their, let's back up. When they were given the land, when they were to chase out the inhabitants of the land, what was the justification for doing that? Was it the fact that Israel was righteous and the people in those lands were not righteous? God wanted to make sure they knew that wasn't the case. Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. Ellen White famously expressed it like this: what is justification by faith? It is the work of God in laying the glory of man in the dust and doing for man that which is not in his power to do for himself. When men see their own nothingness, they are prepared to be clothed with righteousness of Christ. When you consider who God is and how holy he is, in contrast to those who are, and how holy in contrast to him who we are, it would have to take an amazing act of grace to save us. And it did. That act of grace happened at the cross, with Christ, the innocent one, dying for the sins of the guilty. The point was made that it wasn't because of Israel's righteousness that they were given the land, but it was rather because of the evil of the people in the land. And Israel, I guess you might say, they were a bit better than the people that they chased out, but they were certainly not a holy people. They were sinful, and over again, that was brought out. And we find, if one could encapsulate Paul's teaching on the gospel, perhaps it could be found in the phrase from Deuteronomy 9:5. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart is God going to save you. Instead, he's going to do it because of the promises of the everlasting gospel, Revelation 14:6. A promise given us not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace, which was given to us in Christ Jesus before time began. 2 Timothy 1:9. And if that was given before time began, then it wouldn't be anything that we had done, would it? We weren't even in existence at that point. In short, despite your faults, your flaws, your stiff necks, the Lord is going to do this wonderful work for you and in you. Thus, as a result, the Lord commands you to obey him and his laws. The promise already has been given and delivered. Your works, your obedience, even if they were good enough, which they aren't the means of your salvation. They are instead the result. The Lord has saved you by grace. Now, with his law written in your hearts and his spirit empowering you, go and obey his law. The enemy of Christ, who rebelled against God's law in heaven, has a skilled, trained general worked with all his power, bringing out one device after another, full of deception to make of non-effect the law of God, the only true detector of sin, the standard of righteousness. From Ellen White, A Peculiar People. Talking about the work of Satan, God's enemy, and what does the world look like today? It seems like the majority of people don't even believe in God, do they? The majority of people don't feel that they have to obey anything other than their own desires. Satan has done a marvelous job of destroying God's law and the things that are important. Did you have one?
I was just going to say, I just don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg. Because did people stop believing in God because no one was going to church anymore? Or is it because no one was going to church that they stopped believing in God? Because if we are studying something, we're going to be more educated about it. And as we all know, this generation doesn't go to church. But if they were more educated, they might be believed.
Okay, that certainly could have some influence there. I also can't help but think education today denies the existence of God for the most part. The sciences teach evolution. So somebody getting an education in the normal places of education now, in the high school and the public colleges and so forth, they don't have much of a chance to learn about God, do they? Because most of the professors don't believe in God. They've promoted a theory of how this world came about that denies that there's a God. And it's hard to understand how people could believe in God, you know, with all the way the educational system is going today. And I think that's a lot of it. Is the educational system has denied a God, and people have accepted that because, you know, the professors are the most intelligent people around, and they have told people what they should believe. And maybe maybe the church has failed in many respects of being able to help people to believe there is a God. Yes, somebody has a question over here.
I was just thinking your parents should be teaching you about God, and maybe there's a failure there, or the parents are teaching about God, and then they're going to school and learning otherwise and questioning. I don't know.
Okay. It would seem that mankind, left to his own devices, tends to deny God because it interferes with what they want to do. You have something?
Yes, I'm not sure that there's much difference between today religion and during, let's say, Israelites worshiping God. They were surrounded by so much difference than what they were supposed to do. So they conformed to their surroundings. Today, uh, I don't think that we can blame the church or maybe parents or whatever, because we are surrounded by the same problem that Israelites were surrounded. But what there is enough religion available through all of the mediums that we have, television and radios and all that, God is available, His message is available, and people can get just as much, just as close to God now as during Israelites. I don't see any difference. I see that temptations there, they had the temptation, Satan was there doing his part as he's doing today, maybe even more so. But we have the same opportunity now and 50 years back, 100 years back, or even to the time of Israelites. God is there, is available. And if we reach to God, He will make everything available to us, even if sometimes we use excuses of different kind of regulations like these masks we are wearing and so forth. We uh, do it because we think we're conforming to whatever. But it's conforming to things that God does not want us to conform, and we got to be careful and not step over the line and start worshiping idols like they did. Another thing I'd like to just add to statement you made earlier about uh, law and grace. I had a very unusual experience like 20, 30 years ago here in Napa. I was getting on the freeway and I turned on Lincoln and I had this huge, I should say, truck that just would not conform to that hairpin turn. As I came around on that hairpin turn, I could not keep it within the lane. I had to move over to oncoming traffic. Fortunately, there was oncoming traffic there. But I found out that I pushed a policeman off the road because he was on my left and I didn't realize he was there. I needed more room. I took the room and I pushed him off. So obviously the red light went on and when I got stopped, normal thing, license, insurance and all that. And I gave him the insurance. I couldn't find my license because I left my wallet at home. And he looked at me and he says, "You don't have your wallet with you." I said, "No, I don't." And so I didn't have the nerve to look at his face, but my wife told me later on it was a policeman, it was an angel. But after I told him I did not have my driver's license, he says, "Drive more carefully as you go forward." Now, the law was there. I knew the law. I broke the law. And the grace was the policeman or the angel, whatever it was, that gave that opportunity. So grace and law are totally connected. You can't separate them together. You can't have grace if you don't have law. You can't have law if you don't have grace. So they kind of go together. So I've always remembered that God's grace is such that we need to always remember we have an opportunity today to reach out to God as well as I think Israelites had in those days. And sometimes some choose to do so, others not.
Thank you. Yes. Um, When you think about your first point, when you think about the history of the world, we've always had the temptations available to us, haven't we? We know that the world was in pretty bad shape at the time of the flood when God destroyed it, except for 8 souls. And perhaps we're in better shape right now than they were. I don't know. I would hope so. But yeah, and today, in spite of all the teachings, the false teachings that are out there, as you mentioned, the opportunity is there to find God if we want to find Him. But unfortunately, human nature is such that if allowed to go its own direction, it isn't toward God. It's toward doing our own thing. And that's the way the majority appear to be going, is doing their own thing, going their own way.
I think that we have replaced God with idols. We now have our idols, whether they're our car, our job, our house, or doing better than the Joneses. And in replacing them with God, we don't look to God first, but we look to where we are, how important we are, and how our idols shine on us.
Okay. Yeah, we're still idol worshipers, aren't we? Yes, a different form of idol. I suppose wealth has always been an idol, but now we have much more sophisticated idols that cost a lot of money, and but they fill our need to be important. They fill our need to do our own thing. Okay, let's see what I can conclude here. I think I read this thing about Satan. Yes, I did. Okay. Now, I'm going to read this little section. Now is the principle of existence. Whatever conceives of and creates something must be greater than and transcend what it conceived of and created. Picasso is greater than and transcends an artwork by Picasso. The God who conceived of and created our cosmos must be greater than the cosmos and transcend it as well. Of course, most people deny that there is a God, so that doesn't mean anything to them. With that in mind, think of the following text. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. John 1, 1-3. And that is God who created all that was created. And they bring up this number, and I don't know how to read it, the number of stars. It's a 200 followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 triple zeros. Can anybody tell me what that number is? I can count 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion, and I don't know what the last 2 numbers are. But anyway, God created the stars, that many stars. But yet, He shrank down and became a human baby, lived a sinless life, and died on the cross, bearing in himself the penalty for our sins and evil so that we can have the promise of eternal life. Before us is this great truth, the grace given us in Jesus Christ on the cross. And what does God ask for us in return? From us in return? Now all have been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. When it says fear God, that's sometimes that term is misunderstood. What does it mean? I can think of my father, and there were times when I feared my father. And what were those times? When I disobeyed him. And I think in the same sense, we would fear God if we continue to disobey him, if we choose not to obey him. And that term fear, I guess in that respect, is a good term. But I'd much rather have the term respect and honor God because I'm obeying what he wants me to do. And to me, that's a better term. But if we're not doing his will, yes, fear is an important issue there too. Now there's a discussion question here. Well, I guess it's just about time for the music to be started. So I will conclude at this point, and we'll turn the time over to the people who are going to lead us in music. Is that what comes next? Okay. Yes. Oh, okay. There's an envelope for Sabbath School offering if some of you wish to put it in there. Just a moment, I'll show you something. You see this little thing? This little thing can be placed on a page and it holds it open. Somebody gave us these and I've been using it. It helps hold your page.